Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. God is moving in your life right now. You may not see it, you may not feel it, but that doesn't mean He's not working behind the scenes. So often we get caught up in what we see in front of us, the obstacles, the delays, the disappointments. But can I remind you today that what looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater? Maybe you've been praying, waiting, and wondering, God, when is my breakthrough coming? Let me tell you, He's already making a way. He's clearing the path, moving the wrong people out of your life, positioning you for something far better than you imagine. The problem is, we want to see results right away. We want the mountain to move now. But God's timing is perfect. He knows what you need and when you need it. Think about the battles you've already faced. There were times you thought you wouldn't make it, but here you are. That's proof that God is working. That's proof that He's faithful. What He started in your life, He will finish. Now, I want you to hear this. You are not fighting alone. You don't have to struggle, striving in your own strength, trying to figure everything out. No, your job is to trust. Keep doing what God has called you to do. Stay in faith. Speak victory over your situation, not defeat. Stop saying this is never going to change or I'll never get past this. Instead, start declaring God is fighting for me. He's removing every obstacle and He's leading me. God is always at work in your life, whether you see it or not. So often we get caught up in what's happening around us, the struggles, the delays, the unanswered prayers, and we begin to wonder if God is really doing anything at all. But just because you don't see immediate results doesn't mean God isn't moving. He is always working behind the scenes, arranging things in your favor, setting things in motion that you don't even realize yet. Think about the times in your life when things seemed impossible. Maybe you faced a financial crisis, a difficult relationship, or a job loss. At that moment, it felt like nothing was changing, like God wasn't answering your prayers. But looking back, you can see how everything worked out, how the right opportunity came, how the right people showed up, and how what you thought was a loss was actually a redirection to something better. That's the evidence of God working behind the scenes. He never stops. He never takes a break. He is always moving, even when you don't feel it. One of the biggest challenges we face as believers is trusting God's unseen work. Our human nature wants to see progress. We want visible proof that things are improving. But faith isn't about seeing, it's about believing. It's about knowing deep in your heart that God is aligning everything for your good, even if nothing around you seems to be changing. The Bible tells us that we walk by faith, not by sight. That means we have to trust God's process, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Sometimes God works in ways we don't expect. We think He should open a door right away, but instead, He keeps it closed. We think He should remove a challenge immediately, but instead, He allows it to strengthen us. The reason is that God sees the bigger picture. He knows what we need, and He knows when we need it. If He hasn't moved yet, it's because He is still putting things in place. He is moving the right people into position, shifting circumstances, and preparing you to receive the blessing when the time is right. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He had dreams of greatness. But before he could step into that promise, he was betrayed, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. To the outside world, it looked like God had abandoned him. But in reality, God was working behind the scenes the entire time. Every trial Joseph faced was positioning him for his destiny. Had he gone straight to the palace without the process, he wouldn't have been prepared for the responsibility God had for him. In the same way, you may not see it now, but God is using your challenges to prepare you for greater things. When we trust that God is working behind the scenes, we can rest in His peace. Instead of worrying about how things will turn out, we can let go of the need to control everything and allow Him to do what only He can do. Worrying won't change the outcome. Stressing over how and when God will move won't speed up the process. What will make a difference is staying in faith, continuing to pray, and believing that in His perfect timing, everything will come together. Sometimes God allows delays because He is protecting us. Sometimes we may not understand why things didn't happen when we wanted them to, but later we see that His timing was for our benefit. That job you didn't get, the relationship that didn't work out, or the opportunity that seemed to pass you by, those were all part of His divine plan. He was closing the wrong doors so that He could open the right ones. He was keeping you from settling for something less when He had something better in store. Waiting on God's timing can be challenging, but it is never wasted time. Every moment that you wait in faith is a moment that God is working on your behalf. He is strengthening you, building your character, and preparing you for what's ahead. He is orchestrating things in the background that you can't even imagine. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean nothing is happening. You don't see the roots growing underground, but they are what make the tree strong enough to stand. In the same way, God is doing a deep work in your life, strengthening your faith, increasing your resilience, and making sure that when the breakthrough comes, you are ready for it. God's work is often subtle. It's in the small things, the people He brings across your path, the unexpected opportunities, the delays that seem frustrating but are actually part of His protection. Sometimes what feels like a detour is actually the best route to your destiny. You may be wondering why something is taking so long, why things aren't changing faster, but trust that God knows exactly what He's doing. His plan is perfect, and His ways are higher than ours. You don't have to figure everything out on your own. You don't have to force things to happen. Your job is to stay faithful, to keep believing, to keep declaring that God is working even when you don't see it. Speak life over your situation. Instead of saying, nothing is happening, start saying, God is moving behind the scenes. Instead of thinking, this will never change, remind yourself, God is working all things together for my good. No matter what it looks like right now, hold on to this truth. God is always at work. The same God who has been faithful before will be faithful again. The obstacles in front of you are not permanent. The delays are not the end of your story. Behind the scenes, God is setting things in motion, aligning people and opening doors that no one can shut. Stay in faith because your breakthrough is on the way. Waiting on God's timing can be one of the hardest things to do. When you're believing for something, praying, trusting, and standing in faith, yet nothing seems to be happening, it's easy to feel discouraged. It's easy to think, maybe this isn't going to work out. Maybe God isn't listening. Maybe my dreams will never come to pass. But what we have to remember is that delays are not denials. Just because something isn't happening right now doesn't mean it's not going to happen. God's timing is perfect, and when He is working in your life, there is always a purpose behind every delay. We live in a world that values instant results. Everything around us is fast. Fast food, fast internet, fast deliveries. When we want something, we want it now. But God doesn't operate on our timetable. He sees the bigger picture, and sometimes what seems like a delay is actually a necessary part of the process. What if God gave you what you're asking for before you were ready? What if He opened a door before you had the strength, wisdom, or character to walk through it? The delay is not about denying you the blessing. It's about preparing you for it. Think about a child asking a parent for something they aren't ready for yet. If a young child asks to drive a car, a loving parent won't just hand over the keys. It's not because they want to withhold something good, but because the child isn't prepared. If they drove before learning how, they could hurt themselves. The parent isn't saying no forever. They are saying not yet. It's the same with God. When we ask for something and don't receive it immediately, it doesn't mean God is saying no. It may simply mean not yet. I'm preparing you. I'm making sure everything is in place so that when you do receive it, you can handle it. Sometimes delays happen because God is protecting us. We may think we're ready for something, but God knows what's ahead. He knows the challenges that come with the blessing, and if He allows us to receive something too soon, it could cause more harm than good. There are times when God closes doors, not because He's punishing us, but because He's redirecting us to something better. That job you didn't get, that relationship that didn't work out, that opportunity that seemed to pass you by, what if those weren't losses, but actually God's way of leading you to something greater? What if what you thought was a setback was really a setup for something better than you imagined? In the Bible, Abraham and Sarah were promised a child, but they had to wait years before that promise was fulfilled. They tried to take matters into their own hands by having a child through Hagar, but that wasn't God's plan. How many times do we do the same thing? We get tired of waiting, so we try to force something to happen on our own. But when we rush ahead of God, we create problems that could have been avoided. If Abraham and Sarah had waited on God's perfect timing, they would have saved themselves heartache and struggle. When we face delays, we have a choice. We can either grow frustrated, complain, and give up, or we can trust that God is working and use the waiting time to prepare ourselves. How we respond to delays determines whether we move forward in victory or stay stuck in frustration. If we spend our waiting season complaining, we'll miss the opportunity to grow. But if we choose to trust God, if we remain faithful, and if we keep speaking His promises over our lives, we will come out stronger, wiser, and better prepared for the blessing when it comes. Waiting is never easy, but it is necessary. It develops patience, strengthens our faith, and teaches us to rely on God instead of our own timing. The Bible says those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. That means waiting isn't about sitting around doing nothing. It's about staying in faith, continuing to trust, and believing that God is moving even when we don't see it. When you understand that delays are part of God's plan, you stop fighting against them and start embracing them as part of the process. Think about a farmer planting seeds. He doesn't plant today and expect a full harvest tomorrow. He knows there is a process. There's a time for planting, a time for watering, and a time for harvesting. If the farmer gets impatient and tries to dig up the seeds too soon, he'll ruin the harvest. In the same way, we have to trust God's timing. The seeds of your prayers, your faith, and your obedience have been planted. Just because you don't see anything happening above the surface doesn't mean nothing is happening. God is working underground, strengthening your roots, preparing you for the day when your harvest will come. One of the biggest mistakes we can make is giving up too soon. Too often people walk away from their dreams because they think it's taking too long. They stop praying, stop believing, and stop expecting because they assume the delay means it's not going to happen. But what if they had just held on a little longer? What if their breakthrough was right around the corner? The enemy wants you to give up before you see your promise fulfilled. He wants you to believe that the delay means it's over. But God says, keep going. Stay in faith. The blessing is coming. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many delays you face, remember this: God's plan for your life is still in motion. The delay is not a denial. It's a setup for something greater. What you're waiting for is worth it, and when the time is right, God will open the door, remove the obstacle, and bring you into the victory He has already planned for you. Keep trusting, keep believing, and know that everything is happening exactly as it should according to His perfect plan to victory. Life is full of challenges, and sometimes it can feel like we're barely making it through. There are moments when the weight of circumstances seems too heavy, when the prayers we've prayed for so long seem unanswered, and when we begin to wonder if things will ever get better. But here's the truth. If you look back over your life, you'll see that you've already overcome so much. The very fact that you are still standing today is proof that God has been working in your life all along. What He brought you through before, He will bring you through again. His faithfulness in the past is a guarantee of His faithfulness in the future. Think about the difficult seasons you've already survived. Maybe there was a time when you didn't know how you would pay the bills, but somehow you made it. Maybe you went through heartbreak and thought you'd never recover, but here you are, stronger than ever. Maybe you faced rejection, failure, or disappointment, yet you came out on the other side. Those weren't just random events. Those were moments where God's hand was upon you, guiding you, strengthening you, and making a way when there seemed to be none. If He did it before, He will do it again. Too often we forget the battles we've already won. When a new challenge arises, we panic, worry, and wonder if this time things will be different. But we need to remind ourselves of all the times God has been faithful. When David faced Goliath, he didn't focus on the size of the giant. He reminded himself of what God had already done. He said, "The same God who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." David's confidence wasn't in his own strength. It was in the God who had never failed him before. And that same God has never failed you either. Every battle you've won has strengthened you. Every trial you've faced has built your faith. Every time God has brought you through, He has been preparing you for greater things. Sometimes we want to avoid struggles, but the reality is without them we wouldn't grow. Muscles don't get stronger without resistance, and faith doesn't grow without challenges. If God removed every obstacle instantly, we would never develop the strength, wisdom, and endurance we need for the future. That's why we have to look at our past victories as reminders that we can trust Him with what's ahead. Think about the children of Israel when they were in the wilderness. God had already delivered them from slavery, parted the Red Sea, and provided for them in miraculous ways. But as soon as a new challenge arose, they doubted Him all over again. They worried, they complained, and they forgot what He had already done. How often do we do the same thing? God has brought us through so much, but when a new problem comes, we act like He has never helped us before. We need to remind ourselves that the same God who is faithful then is faithful now. He hasn't changed, and He never will. One of the best things you can do when facing a new challenge is to keep a record of the times God has been faithful. Write down the moments when He answered your prayers, when He provided, when He opened a door, when He healed you, when He gave you peace in the middle of the storm. Then, when doubt tries to creep in, go back and read what He has done. Remind yourself that He has never left you and He's not about to start now. We also need to be careful about the words we speak during difficult times. It's easy to say things like, "This is never going to change," or "I don't see how I'll get through this," or "But what if," instead, we declared, "God has brought me through before, and He will do it again." Our words shape our perspective. When we focus on past victories, we build our faith for future ones. Instead of letting fear take over, we can say with confidence, "The same God who provided before will provide again. The same God who healed me before will heal me again. The same God who made a way before will make a way again." Another reason we need to remember God's past faithfulness is because it keeps us from making decisions out of fear. When we forget what He has done, we start relying on our own strength. We try to force things to happen instead of trusting His timing. But when we remember His faithfulness, we can rest in the assurance that He is in control. We don't have to strive, stress, or manipulate situations. We can simply trust that He has a plan and that His plan is always good. Sometimes the enemy will try to make you feel like your past victories don't matter. He will try to convince you that this time is different, that this problem is bigger, that this situation is impossible. But He is a liar. The same God who parted the sea, who made water flow from a rock, who fed thousands with just a few loaves and fish, that same God is still working today. He hasn't lost His power, and He hasn't changed His mind about you. You may not see the way forward right now, but that's okay. You didn't see the way forward last time either, and yet God made a way. You may not understand how it will all work out, but you don't have to. Your job is not to figure everything out. It's to trust that the God who has carried you this far isn't about to leave you now. He is still working, still moving, still making a way. If you ever feel doubt creeping in, take a moment to look back. Look at what God has already done in your life. Look at the prayers He has answered, the doors He has opened, the battles He has won for you. Let those memories fuel your faith. Let them remind you that He is still in control. Because the truth is, you are already living in the proof of God's faithfulness. What He has done before, He will surely do again. Trusting God instead of striving is one of the most freeing choices we can make in life. So many people are exhausted, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, because they are trying to control everything, force outcomes, and make things happen in their own strength. They pray and believe, but at the same time they feel the need to push, manipulate circumstances, and figure everything out. But God never intended for us to live like that. His Word tells us to trust Him, to rest in His promises, and to let Him take care of the things we cannot control. When we strive in our own strength, we often end up frustrated. We try to fix problems that only God can fix. We try to open doors that only God can open. We worry about things that are completely out of our hands, and instead of finding peace, we find ourselves worn out, discouraged, and feeling like nothing is working. That's because we were never meant to carry that burden. The Bible tells us to cast our cares on the Lord, for He cares for us. That means we are not supposed to walk around stressed and anxious trying to figure out everything on our own. We are supposed to surrender our worries to God and trust that He is working behind the scenes. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with trusting God is because they feel like they need to be in control. They want to know when, how, and in what way things will happen. But faith doesn't work like that. Faith is trusting God even when you don't see how things will come together. It's believing that He is orchestrating the right people, the right opportunities, and the right timing, even when it doesn't make sense. Think about the story of Peter walking on water. As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he was able to do something that should have been impossible. But the moment he looked at the waves, the circumstances around him, he began to sink. The same thing happens in our lives. When we focus on God and trust Him completely, we can walk through challenges with peace and confidence. But the moment we focus on the problems, the obstacles, and the uncertainties, we begin to sink into worry, doubt, and fear. That's why we have to make a daily decision to keep our trust in God, not in our own efforts. Striving comes from a place of fear. Fear that if we don't do something, nothing will change. That if we don't take control, things will fall apart. But when we truly trust God, we can let go of that fear. We can rest knowing that He is in charge. That doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. Faith requires action. But it means that our action is guided by peace, not driven by stress. There is a difference between working in peace and striving in anxiety. There's a big difference between working in peace and striving in anxiety. When you are trusting God, you do your part, but you also rest in the fact that God will do His part. You move forward with wisdom, but you don't push or force things to happen. You pray, but you don't beg God as if He's reluctant to bless you, because He's not. He loves you, and He has good plans for your life. When you truly understand that, you stop striving and start resting in Him. Think about the difference between a child and an adult in a family. A child doesn't worry about whether there will be food on the table tomorrow. They don't stress about paying bills or making sure the house is taken care of. Why? Because they trust their parents to handle those things. That's the kind of trust God wants us to have in Him. He is our Father, and He has promised to take care of us. When we trust Him like a child trusts their parent, we can stop striving and start living in peace. Some of the most frustrating moments in life come from trying to force things that aren't meant to happen yet. Have you ever tried to open a door that was stuck? The more you push, the more resistance you feel, but when the right key is used, the door opens effortlessly. That's how it is with God. When it's His timing, doors will open that no one can shut. When it's His plan, things will come together in ways you never expected. But when we strive, we end up frustrated, pushing against something that isn't meant to open yet. The enemy wants you to believe that if you don't make things happen, they never will. But God says, "Be still and know that I am God." That doesn't mean we sit around doing nothing. It means we stop striving, stop worrying, and trust that He is in control. It means we choose to live in peace, even when we don't have all the answers. It takes humility to trust God fully. When we strive, we are essentially saying, "God, I don't think you're moving fast enough, so I need to take over." But when we trust Him, we acknowledge that His ways are higher than ours, His timing is better than ours, and His plan is greater than anything we could come up with. Letting go of striving doesn't mean giving up on your dreams. It means surrendering the outcome to God. It means saying, "Lord, I trust you with this situation. I trust you with my future. I trust you with my finances, my relationships, my health, and my dreams. I'm not going to try to force things to happen in my own strength. I'm going to rest in the fact that you are working on my behalf." When you live with that kind of trust, you will experience a peace that goes beyond understanding. You will walk through challenges without being overwhelmed. You will see God open doors that you never could have opened on your own. Because when you stop striving and start trusting, you give God room to do what only He can do. There are times in life when we feel like we're stuck, like no matter how hard we try, we keep running into obstacles, setbacks, and closed doors. It can be frustrating when you're doing everything you know to do, yet nothing seems to be changing. But here's what you need to remember. Just because you don't see anything happening doesn't mean God isn't working. He is always working behind the scenes, orchestrating things in ways you can't even imagine. While you're waiting, He is preparing. While you're trusting, He is aligning things in your favor. Just because you don't see progress in the natural doesn't mean there isn't movement in the spiritual. One of the biggest mistakes we can make is assuming that if we don't see immediate results, God must not be doing anything. But faith isn't about seeing, it's about believing. When a seed is planted in the ground, you don't see anything happening at first. There's no visible growth. But under the soil, something powerful is taking place. The roots are growing deep, the foundation is being established, and in time, that seed will break through the surface and produce a harvest. That's exactly how it is with God's work in your life. You may not see it yet, but beneath the surface, things are shifting, things are growing, and things are aligning for your breakthrough. Think about the story of Joseph in the Bible. He was given a dream from God at a young age, but for years, it looked like his life was going in the opposite direction. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison, and forgotten. If Joseph had judged his future by his circumstances, he could have easily thought, "God isn't doing anything for me." But what Joseph didn't realize was that God was working the entire time. Every hardship, every delay, and every setback was actually part of God's plan to position him for something greater. If Joseph had gone straight from the dream to the throne, he wouldn't have been prepared. But because he endured the process, he was ready for the blessing when it finally came. Sometimes we want the victory without the preparation. We want the promotion without the process. But God doesn't work that way. He knows what we need to be ready for the blessings He has in store. If He gave us everything we wanted the moment we asked for it, we wouldn't be able to handle it. The waiting season isn't about God withholding something from you. It's about God preparing you for something greater. The longer the wait, the bigger the blessing. We live in a world of instant gratification. We want things quickly, and we don't like to wait. But God's timing is different from ours. He is never late, and He is never in a hurry. If something hasn't happened yet, it's because God is still working. He is making sure that everything is in place, not just for the blessing itself, but so that you can sustain it when it comes. Some doors stay closed because the blessing on the other side is bigger than you can handle right now. Some prayers go unanswered for a time because there are lessons you still need to learn. Instead of being discouraged in the waiting, recognize that God is strengthening you, refining you, and preparing you for more than you could ever imagine. When God is working behind the scenes, you won't always understand what He is doing. His ways are higher than ours, and His thoughts are beyond what we can comprehend. That's why trust is so important. If you base your faith on what you see, you'll be up one day and down the next. But when you base your faith on who God is and what He has promised, you can remain steady no matter what your circumstances look like. One of the best things you can do while you're waiting on God is to keep your heart and attitude in the right place. It's easy to complain, to get discouraged, and to give up. But that kind of attitude will only delay what God is trying to do. Instead of complaining, start praising. Instead of doubting, start declaring God's promises over your life. Speak life into your situation. Say things like, God is working behind the scenes for my good. Doors are opening for me. Favor is coming my way. The right people are being aligned for my destiny. When you speak in faith, you activate God's power in your life. Think about a puzzle. When you first start putting it together, the pieces don't seem to make sense. It looks like a mess, and you can't see the full picture. But as you keep working piece by piece, everything starts to come together. That's what God is doing in your life. You may only see a few pieces right now, but He sees the full picture. And when the time is right, everything will come together in a way that will leave you in awe of His goodness. If you feel like you're in a season of waiting, don't lose heart. The fact that you haven't seen the breakthrough yet doesn't mean it's not coming. It just means God is still working. He is setting things up. He is aligning the right opportunities. He is preparing the people you need to meet, the doors that need to open, and the resources that need to come your way. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. Your job is not to figure out how or when God will do it. Your job is to trust Him, to stay in faith, and to keep moving forward. Keep being faithful where you are. Keep praying, keep believing, and keep expecting. Because at the right time and the right way, God will reveal what He has been working on all along. And when He does, you will see that every delay, every challenge, and every closed door was part of His perfect plan to bring you into something far greater than you could have imagined. There is nothing more powerful than a person who knows that God has already secured their victory. When you truly understand that the battle has already been won, you stop living in fear and start walking in faith. Too many people go through life anxious and unsure, wondering if things will ever change, if they will ever overcome, if they will ever step into the promises of God. But here's the truth. You are not fighting for victory. You are fighting from a place of victory. God has already declared you victorious. He has already overcome every obstacle you will ever face. The enemy wants you to believe that you are struggling to win, but the reality is that Jesus already won the battle on your behalf. The Bible says in Romans 15:57, "But thanks be to God, He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." That means victory isn't something you have to earn. It's something that has already been given to you. Your job is to believe it, receive it, and walk in it. One of the biggest tricks of the enemy is to make you doubt what God has already promised. He whispers lies like, "You're not strong enough, you're not good enough, things will never change." But when those thoughts come, you have to remind yourself of what God has said. He calls you more than a conqueror. He says that no weapon formed against you will prosper. He has declared that He will finish the good work He started in you. When you know who you are in Christ, the enemy's lies lose their power. Look at the story of the Israelites when they were about to enter the Promised Land. God had already told them that the land was theirs. He had already secured their victory. But when the 12 spies went in to check out the land, 10 of them came back with a bad report. They saw the giants in the land and said, "We can't do this. We are like grasshoppers compared to them." But Joshua and Caleb had a different mindset. They didn't deny that there were giants, but they knew that God was greater. They said, "We are well able to take the land." They believed in the victory that God had already promised. The difference between the 10 spies and Joshua and Caleb wasn't their situation, it was their perspective. They were looking at the same land, the same giants, the same obstacles. But one group saw defeat while the other saw victory. The same is true in your life. Two people can face the same challenge, but one will live in fear while the other walks in faith. The question is, are you focusing on the obstacles or are you focusing on the promises of God? Victory starts in your mind before it ever manifests in your life. If you don't believe you're victorious, you will live as if you are defeated. That's why the Bible tells us to renew our minds, because our thoughts shape our reality. If you constantly dwell on negativity, fear, and doubt, you will never step into what God has for you. But when you fill your mind with His Word, when you declare His promises, when you refuse to entertain the enemy's lies, you will begin to walk in the confidence that victory is already yours. Another important thing to remember is that victory doesn't always come instantly. Sometimes God allows us to go through battles because He is strengthening us, preparing us, and teaching us how to trust Him. Think about David before he became king. He had been anointed by God, but he still had to face Goliath. He still had to run from Saul. He still had to go through years of difficulty before stepping into his destiny. But through it all, David never lost sight of the fact that God was on his side. He knew that no matter how things looked, his victory was already secured. Maybe right now you're in a battle. Maybe you're facing something that seems impossible, but just because you don't see the victory yet doesn't mean it's not coming. God has already gone ahead of you. He has already made a way where there seems to be none. He has already lined up everything you need to step into the fullness of His plan. Your job is to keep standing in faith. One of the best ways to strengthen your faith is to start speaking victory over your life. Your words have power. Proverbs 18:21 says, "Life and death are in the power of the tongue." If you keep saying, "I'll never get through this. Nothing ever works out for me. I don't know if I can do this," then you are agreeing with the enemy. But if you start declaring, "I am victorious. God is fighting for me. Every obstacle is being removed. I am stepping into my destiny," then you are aligning your words with God's promises. There is something powerful about a person who refuses to be moved by circumstances. A person who can look at a challenge and say, "I may not see the way, but I know God has already made one." A person who can face adversity with the confidence that greater is He who is in me than he who is in the world. That's the kind of mindset that leads to victory. When you understand that victory is already yours, you stop living in frustration. You stop worrying about how things will work out. You stop feeling overwhelmed by every setback. Instead, you start walking in peace, knowing that God is in control. You begin to praise Him in advance, even before you see the breakthrough. You trust that He is working all things together for your good. Right now, God is positioning you for something greater. He is aligning the right people, the right opportunities, and the right moments to bring you into everything He has promised. Even when things don't seem to be going your way, He is still working. Even when the enemy tries to attack, God is turning it around for your good. The battle is not yours to fight alone. God is fighting for you. So lift your head high, walk with confidence, speak words of faith. No matter what comes against you, remember that God has already given you the victory. You are not a victim, you are a victor. You are not defeated, you are an overcomer. And when you stand firm in that truth, nothing can stop you from stepping into the amazing future God has prepared for you